Since the start of this war with Iran, even before it, there were a lot of voices in the America First movement and the MAGA movement that were saying, this is Israel's war. This is Israel dragging America into a war, that America's fighting a war on Israel's behalf, and that this is a sign that Israel controls American foreign policy. And that was even before the war started. Well, this has ramped up significantly in the last day because of remarks that were made by Secretary of State Marco Rubio in when he was visiting Congress yesterday. Okay, so we're going to take a look at those, but first I want to show you what is being said about his remarks. Okay, so on the America First right, there are people. So here's Savannah Hernandez. This is a perfect example. Everyone is sharing this exact same clip. Okay, so here's her tweet. Here's her tweet. Oh, here, let me do this. One of our viewers mentioned to me that when I'm showing you guys stuff on the screen, I should do this and it would be much more helpful. And I agree. So I'm going to try to remember to do this as often as possible. So here's what he writes. Here's what Savannah Hernandez writes. And this is just typical. You'll see similar stuff all over social media using this clip and quote of Rubio. And I'm going to show you other examples to say exactly what I just said, that Israel has dragged America into a war that was not really in American interest, okay? So here's Savannah Hernandez. And she's a pretty popular social media person. She's got 728,000 followers. And as you see here, her banner picture on her Twitter, on her X, is a picture of her with Tucker Carlson. So that gives you a sense of where she stands, but she's very popular in the America First movement. Look what she writes. Crazy to hear Marco Rubio say that Israel knew that if they attacked Iran, the United States and our servicemen were going to pay the price, but they didn't care and forced our hand, leading to the death of Americans. Infuriating to hear. And then you.
The second question that's been asked is, why now? Well, there's two reasons why now. The first is it was abundantly clear that if Iran came under attack by anyone, the United States or Israel or anyone, they were going to respond against the United States. The orders had been delegated down to the field commanders. It was automatic, and in fact, it bared to be true because, in fact, within an hour of the initial attack on the leadership compound, the missile forces in the south and in the north, for that matter, had already been activated to launch. In fact, those had already been pre-positioned. The third is the assessment that was made that if we stood and waited for that attack to come first before we hit them, we would suffer much higher casualties. And so the president made the very wise decision. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed. And then we would all be here answering questions about why we knew that and didn't act. Going back.
Okay, and that's the end of the clip that she posts. And again, if you look at all the America First social media posts that are making this argument and freaking out because Marco Rubio said the quiet part out loud and said that the only reason we're going to war now is because the Israelis were going to attack the Iranians, and when the Israelis attack the Iranians would attack the Americans, and that means that the Israelis knew that they were dragging us into a war and we had no choice but to go to war. That is the argument that they are making. And it sounds a lot like that's what Marco Rubio just said in that clip. Okay. And it's not just social media posts. Here's a piece that ran today in the Federalist, a very popular, very influential online magazine in the America First movement. And it's written by John Daniel Davidson. He writes for them a lot. How Israel chain ganged the Trump administration into war against Iran. Now, let me just sum up what he says to you in this piece. Okay. So, here's the argument he makes. First, his core claim is that he argues that President Trump didn't independently choose war with Iran, okay, that he allowed Israel to drag the U.S. into it, like I've been saying. He says the administration gave shifting and sometimes contradictory explanations in the early days of the conflict, right, that they weren't being clear about why we're going in. Sometimes Trump was talking about the nuclear, sometimes they were talking about the ballistic missiles. They were talking about the oppression of the people. It wasn't clear. It was shifting, he says. But he doesn't even mention the specific arguments they were making other than the nuclear. It's very interesting in the piece. So Yeah, he says there that they weren't being clear, that the real driver wasn't a clear American interest, but Israel's planned action. And again, he doesn't give any actual arguments that were made other than to say that they weren't clear. Now, the piece then quotes Marco Rubio as from the clip that I just shared with you. It also quotes Speaker Mike Johnson, who right after Rubio stood up to the same microphones and made the same case because he heard it in a briefing from Rubio. And then Davidson goes on to mention that there was reporting that Prime Minister Netanyahu was pressing Trump hard in the days before the attack and worked to prevent the diplomacy, the negotiations from working and from moving forward, which would derail Netanyahu's plans for war. Okay, so this was presented as evidence that Israel was actually steering all the events that are happening now. Now, Davidson then introduces the concept, this term, chain ganging, which is very effective rhetorically. Also, you give people like, oh, there's this term of art in the foreign policy world that we're now witnessing. It's a maneuver by Israel. Now, this term, it's an international relations term. It describes a situation where a smaller or weaker ally's vital interests drag a larger power into a war that it would otherwise avoid. It's called chain ganging. Okay, and so the claim is that's what happened here. Israel chain ganged the Americans. He argues that also that this isn't a new tactic by Israel, that Israel did the similar thing to Obama regarding Iran's nuclear program, also threatening to attack and causing America or trying to get America to attack. And finally, the conclusion of the piece is that if everything that we're saying is true, then the United States wasn't leading events. It was entrapped by Israel's calculations and Israel's interests. And that in his final sentence, he says that raises serious questions about what America first should mean in practice. Okay, so that's the piece by Davidson. Again, making the case that Savannah Hernandez made in a 2-line tweet, but turning it into a whole article. And I cannot stress enough, he talks about the nuclear. And I did a little check after reading the piece just to make sure I didn't miss anything. I checked for the word ballistic missiles. Okay, I searched for it, and I found that the word ballistic doesn't appear even once. The word missile appears once right here. If Israel, and it's in the quote from Mike Johnson, if this was a defensive measure, if Israel fired upon Iran and took action against Iran to take out the missiles, then Iran would have immediately retaliated against U.S. personnel and assets. Okay? Yeah, that's the only place that the word missiles appears. Okay? In the entire piece, which means there was no discussion in the piece of the ballistic missile threat. And I also searched for the word proxies, doesn't appear, doesn't mention that at all. It only talks about the nuclear. Okay? Now, I went to the actual full clip of Marco Rubio speaking, and that's what I want to show you now. Okay, or the relevant portion of it. At the end of it, they start talking about some other domestic-related issues of domestic politics that relate to what's going on in Iran and regime change issues, which are not relevant to this conversation. But we're going to watch now the first 8 minutes of Marco Rubio, and let's see what he actually said in full.
All right, we had to cut into this break. Secretary of State Marco Rubio speaking on the Hill. Let's listen.
The United States conducted this operation with a very clear goal in mind. I haven't got a chance to see a lot of reporting. I don't understand what the confusion is. Let me explain it to you, and I'll do it once again as clearly as possible. Perhaps you'll report it that way. The United States is conducting an operation to eliminate the threat of Iran's short-range ballistic missiles and the threat posed by their Navy, particularly to naval assets. That is what it is focused on doing right now, and it's doing quite successfully. I'll leave it to the Pentagon and the Department of War to discuss the tactics behind that and the progress that's being made. That is the clear objective of this mission. The second question that's been asked is, why now? Well, there's two reasons why now. The first is it was abundantly clear that if Iran came under attack by anyone, the United States or Israel or anyone, they were going to respond against the United States. The orders had been delegated down to the field commanders. It was automatic, and in fact, it bared to be true because, in fact, the within an hour of the initial attack on the leadership compound, the missile forces in the south and in the north, for that matter, had already been activated to launch. In fact, those had already been pre-positioned. The third is the assessment that was made that if we stood and waited for that attack to come first before we hit them, we would suffer much higher casualties. And so the president made the very wise decision. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed. And then we would all be here answering questions about why we knew that and didn't act.
All right, that's what we saw in the clip Savannah Hernandez chose. All the America First people especially the anti-Israel people saying that Israel dragged America into it, cut the clip there. Watch what happens next.
Going back to the purpose of this is to destroy that missile capability. Why does Iran want that ballistic missile capability? What they're trying to do, and have been trying to do for a very long time, is build a conventional weapons capability as a shield where they can hide behind it. Meaning, there would come a point where they have so many conventional missiles, so many drones, can inflict so much damage that no one can do anything about their nuclear program. That is what they were trying to do, is put themselves in a place of immunity where the damage they can inflict on the region would be so high that no one can do anything about their nuclear program or their nuclear ambitions. They are producing, by some estimates, over 100 of these missiles a month. Compare that to the 6 or 7 interceptors that can be built a month. They can build 100 of these a month, not to mention the thousands of one-way attack drones that they also have. They've been doing this for a very long time, and by the way, they've been doing it under sanction. You see the attacks they're conducting right now? They're attacking airports, they're attacking hotels, they're hitting not just military bases, they're attacking our embassies directly, they're attacking facilities that have nothing to do with war or with military, and that's a week in Iran. That's in Iran despite years of sanction. Imagine a year from now or a year and a half from now, the capabilities they would have to inflict damage on us. It's an unacceptable risk, especially in the hands of a regime that's run by radical clerics. The Ayatollah was a radical cleric. That entire regime is led by radical clerics who don't make geopolitical decisions. They make decisions on the basis of theology, their view of theology, which is an apocalyptic one. That has to be taken very seriously as well. So that was the purpose for what this operation is all about. That's what it's focused on. As the president said earlier today, it is on or ahead of schedule. I will defer to the Department of War to discuss the progress being made at a tactical level, but it was the right decision and an important decision for the safety and security of the world.
Does Congress have to weigh it? Is the president accountable? Does Congress have to weigh it? And for an imminent threat, did you tell lawmakers that there was an imminent threat?
There absolutely was an imminent threat, and the imminent threat was that we knew that if Iran was attacked, and we believed they would be attacked, that they would immediately come after us. And we were not going to sit there and absorb a blow before we responded, because the Department of War assessed that if we did that, if we waited for them to hit us first after they were attacked, and by someone else, Israel attacked them, they hit us first, and we waited for them to hit us, we would suffer more casualties and more deaths. We went proactively in a defensive way to prevent them from inflicting higher damage. Had we not done so, there would have been hearings on Capitol Hill about how we knew that this was going to happen, and we didn't act preemptively to prevent more casualties and more loss of life.
Was forced to strike because of an Israeli action?
No, first of all, two things I would say. Number one is, no matter what, ultimately this operation needed to happen. That's the question of why now.
Hold on. I'm going to continue, but listen to what he just said. Let me play those couple seconds again.
We went proactively in a defensive way to prevent them from inflicting higher damage. Had we not done so, there would have been hearings on Capitol Hill about how we knew that this was going to happen, and we didn't act preemptively to prevent.
Sorry, I went back a little far, but listen to what he says after this question. This is the key to the whole thing.
More casualties and more loss of life.
Was forced to strike because of an Israeli action?
Right here.
No, first of all, two things I would say. Number one is, no matter what, ultimately this operation needed to happen. That's the question of why now. But this operation needed to happen because Iran in about a year or a year and a half would cross the line of immunity, meaning they would have so many short-range missiles, so many drones that no one could do anything about it because they could hold the whole world hostage.
Okay.
Look at the.
We're going to continue with this, but listen to what he just said. When he says, why now? In the original clip that we saw from Savannah Hernandez, and that people like Davidson and Federalist are talking about and saying the only reason America is at war is to protect Israel's interests, they're taking the why now, the timing issue that Rubio started the press conference with, out of context. They're talking about it as though saying, like, why are we going to war now, meaning at all, this year? Or Rubio is saying the why now question is about why on Saturday, we were having negotiations and all of the military assets are coming. And why did we launch the attack now? But he says, of course we had to do this, and we had to do it soon, because in a very short amount of time, Iran would be, because of the speed with which they're making their ballistic missiles. And he also did a great job of connecting the ballistic missile threat with the nuclear threat. We'll talk about that more in a minute, but let's let him finish. This is such a key point.
Damage they're doing now. And this is a weakened Iran. Imagine a year from now. So that had to happen. Obviously, we were aware of Israeli intentions and understood what that would mean for us, and we had to be prepared to act as a result of it. But this had to happen no matter what.
Secretary, President Trump said overnight that his top choices to now run with Iran were killed in strikes. Does the United States have a firm plan for how they intend to handle this power vacuum in Iran to ensure that an Iron warliner does not take power?
So two things can be true. Number one is our mission and our focus is the destruction of their ballistic missile capabilities and their ability to manufacture them, as well as the threat posed by their Navy to global shipping. That's their objective. That said, we would not mind, we would not be heartbroken, and we hope that the Iranian people can overthrow this government and establish a new future for that country. We would love for that to be possible. But the objective of this mission is the destruction of their ballistic missile capabilities and of their naval capabilities.
So are you saying, based on that, are you saying that there is no responsibility, no plan for the U.S. to at least play a role in whatever government comes next?
We might. We'll see how circumstances play out. But I'm telling you what the objectives of this operation are. The objectives of this operation are to destroy their ballistic missile capability and make sure they can't rebuild it, and make sure that they can't hide behind that to have a nuclear program. That's the objective of the mission. That said, abundantly clear, we would love for there to be an Iran that's not governed by radical Shia clerics. As I've said myself repeatedly for years, the leadership of that country does not reflect the people of Iran, and I think that's been pretty apparent in the protests that you've seen. If there's something we can do to help them down the road, we'd obviously be open to it, but that's not the objective. The objective of this mission is the destruction of their ballistic missile capability.
Regime change has not gone well for the United States.
What now?
Regime change has not gone well for the United States for many, many decades. How do you assure the American public that things will not get worse for the next regime that comes in there and replaces the
Well, we would love to see this regime be replaced. And ultimately, as the president has said, he calls it, no, but let me finish my answer. As the president said, he would love for the people of Iran to use this as an opportunity to rise up and remove these leaders. They've been wanting to remove them from a long time. We've seen successive waves of protests, and we've seen them slaughter people. Okay, but the objective of this mission is to make sure they don't have these weapons that can threaten us and our allies in the region. That's why we're doing what we're doing now. And while we would love to see a new regime, the bottom line is no matter who governs that country a year from now, they're not going to have these ballistic missiles and they're not going to have these drones to threaten us. That's the objective of this mission, is to deny them the ability to use ballistic missiles to threaten their neighbors, to threaten our bases, to threaten our presence in the region, and ultimately as a shield behind which they can do whatever they want with their nuclear weapons ambition. We were not going to let them hide behind that, and that's why this was such a critical mission to undertake now while they were at their weakest point, and not a year from now where they could inflict even more damage and perhaps already be behind that point of immunity.
Okay, there you have it, folks. There you have it. So now when we go back to what Savannah Hernandez and company were saying, oh my gosh, Rubio said that the only reason we're in this is because the Israelis were going to attack and they dragged us into a war. Rubio just laid out that we had to do this and we had to do it soon. It had to happen within the next few, it had to happen imminently because of the ballistic missile threat. And that the ballistic missile threat is not just about whether they have ballistic missiles that can reach the United States now or what they're building. It's that the ballistic missiles provide a shield behind which they can rebuild their nuclear. So Iran was thinking very strategically. They got their nuclear hammered. They know that was the bee in Trump's bonnet was the nuclear. So ever since the 12-day war, they've been spending billions of dollars. All the money they're making off selling oil to China, they're spending it building ballistic missiles. And that's what the United States was focused on in the negotiations. But the Iranian negotiators, the regime negotiators, the Iranian people are wonderful. The Iranian regime negotiators were refusing to discuss the ballistic missiles. We talked about this in the weeks leading up to this war beginning, that this was a major issue, that for the Americans, the ballistic missile issue was a critical issue, and they kept bringing it up. And the Iranians kept saying that they refused to discuss the ballistic missiles. And the ballistic missile capability provides as he puts it perfectly, it provides a conventional weapons shield behind which they can rebuild their nuclear. So it's connected to the nuclear, and Iran is at their weakest, exactly the points he lays out. This had to happen now. They couldn't wait a year. And as he laid out earlier in it, the production pace of the ballistic missiles was ramping up, and it was way ahead of the ability to produce receptors that could defend against these ballistic missiles. So when he said at the beginning, why now, he didn't mean, why did we attack now? Mean that the entire purpose of this war is because Israel was going to attack them. What he's saying is that in the immediate moment on February 28th, the day that the war started, the reason that it started that day was because where things had reached, the negotiations were stalling. The Israelis were getting impatient because they were not going to allow this charade to go on with these negotiations where the ballistic missiles were not being negotiated on. And meanwhile, Iran is producing over approximately 100 ballistic missiles every single month. And the Israelis were like, listen, we are going to take matters into our own hands. We're going to look after our interests. We plan to attack their ballistic missile capabilities. Oh, Iran is threatening that they're going to attack American interests. Okay, meanwhile, and those American assets were ramping up and increasing. We saw the massive amount of American military assets that had been moved into the region. So the question of why now, and it was why was the attack right now? That's the question he was answering. He wasn't answering a justification for going to war. This guy Davidson in the Federalist took Rubio's answer and twisted it to mean that this was their entire justification for going to war, was that Israel dragged us into it. No, he says America was planning to go to war. Anyway, I hope I've made my case pretty clearly here. Now, the same guy Davidson wrote a piece last week. He wrote a piece that was published on the 25th, on February 25th, just a couple days before this. White House officials, this piece. Sorry about this. Wrong one. On February 27th, a day before, Trump said we obliterated Iran's nuclear program last June. So what are we going to war about? And in this piece, he says the administration's justifications for action against Iran keep shifting. Why can't we get a straight answer? And in this piece, he never once mentions anything other than the nuclear. Not even once. He says President Trump accused Iran of restarting its nuclear program and working to build missiles that would soon be able to reach the United States. Okay, that's the only time he mentions the missiles that Trump mentioned in his State of the Union address, that they're building missiles that could reach the United States. But that's not what the negotiations were about. As I pointed out, there were 4 items on the American negotiation on issues list. There were 4 issues. There was the funding of the proxies. There was the ballistic missiles. There was the nuclear program and the enrichment, and there was the treatment of the Iranian people. And he makes no mention of any of those things and says that the administration is not being clear about why we're going to war. So think about how two-faced this is. He says the administration is not justifying why we're going to war. And then he's writing a piece about that and never once mentions 3 out of the 4 negotiating points that the Americans were insisting on. So it's what we call a straw man, Mr. Davidson. A straw man is where you put up an argument as though it's what you're debating, but it's not what the other side is actually claiming. So he's saying, well, they're saying it's all about the nuclear. They're saying it's all about the nuclear, but it's obviously not all about the nuclear because why are we going to war if we already destroyed their nuclear? And he never once mentions that the administration has other items on its agenda. I also wanted to share this piece in Politico from a few days before the war. White House officials believe the politics are a lot better if Israel strikes Iran first. Okay, and this is an interesting piece in light of what happened a few days later, and it relates to all of this, which is that in the context of the days leading up to this attack, there was some speculation about the Israelis attacking first and whether that was politically better because they knew it would draw an attack on the Americans. But then when they assessed that the attack on the Americans would be too costly, they decided to then preempt it and go in together. That's what now becomes clear. So this also, this seemed like a strange story originally, and I didn't really think it made much sense at the time, because why would the Iranians drag the Americans into it if only Israel struck them? Why would Iran strike American assets and drag the Americans in? But this is what the assessment that they're sharing claims, and it obviously has to do with the fact that all these military assets were moved into the region. So they had some intelligence that indicated that the Iranians were willing to attack American assets. But again, I hope I've put this matter to rest, that this whole issue of Israel dragged America in based on this selectively edited clip of Marco Rubio ignores everything else he said about the reasons why this war has to happen, why it's in America's interest, and why it had to happen now, meaning now as in not next year. So it had to happen now. But when he said now in terms of the day, he was talking about this threat of a retaliation against Israeli attacks. I hope I'd made this clear. And so please share this one with people, especially if you have America First friends who are making this claim that Israel dragged America into a war, and they show you this clip of Rubio. Show them this video to set them straight. Thanks for watching. Please make sure to check out all the great content we're putting up at Israel 365 News videos, and keep watching this channel. We're going to keep bringing you updates on the war. God bless.